There is an entire theology around names. And whosoever shall not take upon him the name of Christ shall be called by some other name. What does that mean to take his name upon us?
Welcome back to the Stick of Joseph channel. I am Ella. Once again, I'm Hayden and Jackson's younger sister, just hanging out on the channel. Today we're with Andrea Woodmansee and Dave Butler, and we're going to be talking about what's in a name. So, Andrea, why is this something that you are passionate about?
So this is a really interesting aspect of the gospel and of our relationship to Jesus Christ that I think we tend to overlook a lot. But if you think about it, this crops up every Sunday when we're at church and taking the sacrament. We do this sometimes almost thoughtlessly or robotically.
Yeah.
But think of what those sacrament prayers are. What is it that we are doing when we take the sacrament? What three things do we say we will do? There's three things we commit to do that are listed in the prayer, and it's first is to take his name upon you. Mm-hmm. Second, keep the commandments. Third, remember. That's it. So I think it's incumbent on us, being that we do this weekly, to understand what it is we're actually doing and what does that mean to take his name upon us. Now, it's easy to just assume that means that, we belong to the church and we represent him, so we should probably be good. But there is an entire theology around names that we miss. It's this ancient theology about names. I think it really ties us and gives us a deeper understanding of what our covenant bond is to the Savior when we understand what it means to take his name upon us. So, in the Hebrew wedding model, you have the bride and the groom. And I mean, this isn't just the Hebrew wedding model. This is any wedding. Bride and groom come together, they make a covenant and promises to each other. And as part of that, the wife traditionally takes the last name of the groom to demonstrate that they are now one unit, one family. They've created this new family. And so that name indicates that shared bond and that covenant that they have. This happened in the Hebrew tradition. They would sign the ketubah. It was like the wedding contract, and it was considered a covenant, but both bride and groom would sign it in triplicate, because this creation of the covenant had to happen under proper authority. That couldn't just be two people saying, well, let's just write on a piece of paper and call it good. There was civil authority, there was religious authority. And as part of that, the bride would then, they'd sign the contract. The bride would then drink a cup of wine that the groom had poured for her to indicate that she is willing to become his wife and to take his name. And at this point, they would be considered married. That was it. So taking the name was part of that betrothal process anciently, and it still is in our world today. I mean, maybe not so much in our world anymore. We're kind of changing things a little bit. But traditionally, the wife would take the name of the husband. So I think what this shows is that when we talk about how when we're baptized, we take his name, we enter that baptismal covenant, that we are entering into a covenant. It starts at baptism. It continues through the temple ordinances, the temple covenants, but it shows that we are in a covenant relationship with the Lord that is not unlike marriage, that we still have. It requires our loyalty, it requires our commitment, it requires love and sacrifice and all of those things to make that covenant fruitful in our lives. So taking his name is really more than just being a representative of him. It's being in a covenant bond with the Savior. And we see this anciently, right? This idea of receiving a new name when you enter into a covenant. So first one that comes to mind is probably Abram becomes Abraham upon making a covenant with God, right? The name changes. His wife Sarai becomes Sarah. what, like, why, why change a name just because you made a covenant? I mean, if you sign a contract with someone, you don't make them change their name, right? So what's different here? Like,
I think a name is like clothing. The change of name or a change of outfit can indicate an ontological change, as a word that Brandon and I were working on earlier.
Ontological.
A change in your
does.
being.
yes.
Right? You put on new clothing to become a new being. So maybe the significance of a new name in connection with a covenant. By the way, this is like a larger discussion. Sacred space always exists in sacred time, which is the time of creation. So you enter sacred space to participate in creation and be created anew yourself. So if you made covenants in that kind of a context in a sacred space, and maybe that marriage covenant might be one of those examples, you are being created anew as a new person. And I think in the sort of biblical paradigm, you're being created anew as one flesh.
Right.
Right, as a new person that is both female and male. And so a new name would be maybe an indication of that.
Yeah, for sure. It indicates that a change of status, a change of role even, and a change of who we are connected to. So, and anciently, names carried great importance. We'll start with a scary example, maybe.
Oh.
Go to Exodus chapter 23. And we have this image here in this passage of an angel guide. So Exodus 23, verse 21, or we'll start in 20. It says, "Behold, I send an angel before thee to keep thee in the way and to bring thee into the place which I have prepared. Beware of him." Now that's kind of interesting. You have this angel guide who's supposed to bring you into the place that's prepared. But you should beware of him. Obey his voice, provoke him not, for he will not pardon your transgressions, for my name is in him. So the whole reason that you're supposed to be afraid of this angel guide is because the name of God is in him.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting, I think. And I think it indicates that there's power and authority tied to the name, that the name is not something to be trifled with. We get then a similar picture in Revelation. We'll flip to the other end of the Bible. Revelation 19, verse 11. And we'll see this idea of a name, a sacred name associated with authority and power. So it says, "And I saw the heaven opened." Side note, what was the one day of the year that you could open the Holy of Holies?
It was the Day of Atonement.
The Day of Atonement. Okay, so this is probably a scene that's occurring on Yom Kippur.
Yep.
"And I saw the heaven opened, and behold, a white horse, and he that sat upon him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he doth judge and make war." So he's being called Faithful and True. These are names, and he's a powerful judge. "His eyes were as a flame of fire, and on his head were many crowns, and he had a name written that no man knew but he himself." So this idea of a sacred name or a secret name, he had this name that no one knew but himself. "And he was clothed with a vesture dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. And the armies which were in heaven followed him upon white horses, and clothed in fine linen, white and clean. And out of his mouth goeth a sharp sword, and that with it he should smite the nations, and he should rule with a rod of iron, and he treadeth the winepress of the fierceness and wrath of Almighty God. And he hath on his vesture and on his thigh a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords." So there's a lot going on in that passage, but I think what we're seeing is this: John's having this vision. This heavenly temple is being opened on the day of Yom Kippur, and we have the bridegroom coming out. And we know that because just the verses prior, it says, verse 7, "Let us be glad and rejoice and give honor to him, for the marriage of the Lamb is come, and his wife hath made herself ready." Okay, so this is already happening in a marriage context.
Yeah.
And here we have the bridegroom coming out, and he has a name written. So on his head were many crowns that have names written on them, sacred names. And he's associated with power and authority in this.
What's up, guys? We'll get back to the video here in a second, but I just want to show you our Not Today Satan t-shirts by Saint Threads that are coming out. They have been out for a while, and our friends here in the Marine Corps, you can see my brother right over there sunbathing in the Eagle Globe and Anchor here in South Korea. So we've been deployed, our Marine buddies have been seeing us wear them, and they're like, man, I got to get me one of those. So we got a big order coming our way, and it just reminded us how cool these t-shirts are. So if you want one, it's got it here on the front, it's got it here on the back. We got a black version as well as this cream version. If you want to get one, support the channel and wear a reminder that every single day you can choose the right and you don't need to yield to the temptations of the devil, then get your shirt. Link in the description. Back to the video.
There's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah, I think this is the Day of Atonement, but I think it is the great Day of Atonement. This is the Day of Atonement. What is the meaning of the Day of Atonement? The Day of Atonement probably has a different creation story. So the day when the Lord comes out bearing the name, he's the high priest, he has the name on his forehead, has a different creation story from Genesis 1. Genesis 1 is the story of the Lord who builds creation, and it's a story you learn in connection with the fall and your personal ascent to the Lord. The story of the Day of Atonement is the Lord who makes a new creation by destroying the old one. And he comes riding out to, and this is all of the references to like slaying the dragon, slaying Leviathan, slaying Rahab. The Lord is enthroned as king after he slays the cosmic enemies. And I think that's this. And by the way, I think let me back you up one verse, because there's something here that's awesome that I'm gonna like disagree with every seminary teacher who ever lived right now. Okay, so what precedes this? By the way, I think this is specifically Jesus. Okay?
Yeah.
It is Jesus who is Yahweh.
He is the great high priest.
He is the great high priest, as Hebrews has it. He is emerging. This is why he has the sharp sword, right? I come not to bring peace, but a sword. And he's Yahweh of the hosts, because Yahweh Sabaoth means Yahweh Tzvaot of the hosts. The hosts are the stars of heaven, the angel army. That is who is following him. The armies which were in heaven followed him upon white horses. These are the stars coming out of heaven, and they are angels clad in linen, charging behind him to destroy, to remake the cosmos. So what does verse 10 say? I fell at his feet to worship him. This is the guide. He said unto me, see thou do it not. I am thy fellow servant, right? The guy he's talking to, I am not Jesus. I'm a servant of thy brethren that have the testimony of Jesus. Worship God, for the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy, right? I'm not God. I'm just the guide who's brought you this far. The testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. So every seminary teacher, probably someone out there is going, no, I'm a seminary teacher and I didn't say that. Okay, except for you. All the rest of those seminary teachers, though, said something like this. Oh, having a testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. That's not what this means. Okay, testimony is martyria. It's seeing. To see Jesus is to have the spirit of prophecy. Okay?
To be a witness. And testimony is like the word witness.
To be a witness.
Yeah.
To have seen Jesus. What immediately then happens? Jesus comes crashing. It's like a scene in a Time Bandit, okay? Where the knights come crashing through the wall. Jesus comes charging out on a horse with Lord on his head to be the day of the great and terrible day of the Lord, right? Yeah, that's what this is.
Yeah. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah. Got excited.
I love it.
He's the Word of God.
He
right?
is.
He's
he is. And okay, so, but you know that because, I mean, there's obviously a lot of indications of that, but because he's wearing these crowns that have this sacred name of power written on them.
Yes.
So, like, what is it? What is that about? Like, why wear a crown with a name on it? This is really ancient, and it derives from the ancient temple, like the first temple. So let's go to. Actually, we won't go too far. Revelation 7, verses 3 and 4. So this is angels getting ready to destroy the earth. And they are told, hurt not the earth, neither the sea nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. And I heard the number of them which were sealed, and they were sealed 144,000 of the tribes of the children of Israel. Okay, everybody gets caught up on the 144,000 there. I'm not really worried about that. what interests me is where it says, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. Why do they need to be sealed in their foreheads?
What is the significance of that?
Yeah, it's kind of strange, right? Well, this is the book of Revelation.
Yeah.
Everything's strange. Flip back to Revelation 14, verse 1, and we see the same thing crop up. It says, and I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on the Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written in their foreheads. So here they were sealed in their foreheads. Now they have a name on their foreheads. Just like that image that Dave likes so much of Jesus crashing through on the horse. Mm-hmm. He's got the crowns with the name.
Yeah.
And side note, where do you wear a crown?
On your head.
Yeah, it's like on your forehead, right?
Yeah.
So that crown and with the name is right there on the forehead, same place that they're being sealed with the Father's name written in their forehead. So this echoes Ezekiel chapter 9. This is a great vision.
The Tav.
Yes. So the prophet Ezekiel is having this incredible vision. I recommend studying it, but we'll just look at a piece here. Ezekiel 9 verses 3 and 4 says, and the glory of the God of Israel was gone up from the cherub whereupon he was to the threshold of the house. And he called to the man clothed with white linen, which had the writer's inkhorn by his side. Now, we'll just pause there for a second. There's some imagery here that I think is interesting. Dave, you correct me if I'm wrong, but the threshold of the house is probably not any old house. Probably temple imagery here.
I mean, if there's a cherub.
Yeah.
And the glory of the Lord is, So
we're at,
a temple from which the glory has departed.
So we're at the temple, and he called to the man clothed with linen. Usually, the man at the temple who was clothed with linen was the high priest, which had a writer's inkhorn by his side. And then he's given this charge. And the Lord said unto him, go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, and set a mark upon the foreheads of the men that sigh and that cry for all the abominations that be done in the midst thereof. So this is really interesting because here this priest is being told to go through the city before its destruction and mark all the righteous in their foreheads.
Yeah.
It's the same picture that we see in Revelation, right?
Interesting.
And there's something interesting about this mark. Like,
yes, there is.
Dave said, what's the mark?
So what it actually says is put a tav on their foreheads, and a tav is a letter, and it's the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and it is one of the T letters. There's more than one T in Hebrew. And what it looks like now is, kind of a door thing, but what it looked like in the old Hebrew alphabet was a cross. It was an X,
right?
A diagonal cross. So he's told to mark people with crosses on their foreheads.
Right. Why? Is there any significance to that? Is it a coincidence?
It seems likely that that's maybe some of the reason, probably one of many reasons why this became a symbol from the Christians, the early Christians, is that they understood that. By the way, when we hear Nephites, prophets, we read the Nephite prophets using phrases like crossing themselves, and it seems potentially anachronistic because it's Nephi or whoever, but it's pre the crucifixion. It may be referring to
marking themselves
right, as a sign of consecration, right, or commitment to abstinence or whatever.
Now, here's something I wondered, and you may have some insight on this. We use this phrase so commonly of looking beyond the mark.
Oh yeah.
Do we misinterpret that maybe? That looking beyond the mark might just mean looking beyond Christ or looking anywhere else for salvation.
Because the mark is the tav.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where does that phrase comes from? It comes from in the New Testament, right? Is it?
Yeah, and it's said to be like a archery term.
Yeah.
Like you're missing the target.
Sure. I think you offer an interesting hypothesis. That might be.
It's a thought.
Yeah.
I just don't know why archery would be.
I don't either. Although the New Testament the argument probably is something like this. The common New Testament verb for to sin is hamartano, which means to miss the target with your bow, with your missile weapon. Most of our language for sin and atonement and forgiveness is metaphorical.
Right.
So that's probably, that may have induced people to misunderstand the phrase looking beyond the mark.
Yeah. I just wonder.
Yeah, maybe.
So,
I don't know.
Throwing out a hypothesis.
I like it.
In each of these cases that we've just looked at, though, there are always people wearing white linen. There's indications that these scenes occur on the Day of Atonement, in the Holy of Holies, or looking into the Holy of Holies. The receiving a mark on the forehead. Clearly, this harkens back to that first temple and to the high priest and what the high priest would do on the Day of Atonement. So let's see.
We're going to be about Aaron wearing the zeets on his forehead?
We might get there.
Okay.
There's so much we could do on this one.
Because the thing the high priest wore on his forehead was called a word that also means a petal of a flower.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, the zeets, or the petalon in Greek. Yeah. Which is interesting, given that Aaron also had the staff that flowered.
Right.
There's Aaron has a flowering association as high priest.
Yeah, and the tree association there is really interesting.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. Next episode.
Okay.
This is the idea of that high priest at the temple. He's in the white linen. He's at the Holy of Holies. He has this mark on his forehead. Like we learned, it's the Tav, which really is the name. It's a symbol of Christ.
Yep.
So more than a mark, it was a name. Now, if you're familiar with the work of Margaret Barker, I know you are, and she's done this look at First Enoch where she talks about an angel. Angel, this isn't the cute little cherub. This is an angel who means business, called Metatron. I know you know who Metatron is. But he's in First Enoch, he's spoken of as being this great angel who is a great judge, and he's sits on a throne behind a veil, and he wears a crown inscribed with a name, and that name is what's referred to as the Tetragrammaton. So it's 4 Hebrew letters that spell the name Yahweh.
Wow.
So you have this image of this angel high priest in the temple, in the Holy of Holies, with this name on the forehead. Let's go look at Exodus 28. And interesting also, in First Enoch, it says that no one could enter the temple without having first received. And if you don't know what Enoch is, it's a book that's not in our Bible. It's apocryphal, so it's not canonical, but it's pretty interesting, right?
It's one of the books that almost made it. Some of the lists, right up to the last minute, some of the lists that suggested what should be in the Christian canon included Enoch. And at least one, the Ethiopian canon, does include it. So if anybody's watching who's an Ethiopian Orthodox member, good job you. Go Enoch.
Let's bring back Enoch.
Yeah.
Make Enoch great again.
Make
Is that
Enoch
what
great again? Mega. That's a good acronym.
Mega. I'll make some hats.
Exodus 28. So this is talking about the role of the high priest, what he would do, what some of these performances were. Verse 12, so the high priest would literally put a crown on his head, basically, with the name of Yahweh. And there's some debate as to whether it said just Yahweh or whether it said holy to Yahweh, or what we think of as holiness to the Lord.
Yeah.
Or whether it just said the Lord.
Okay.
Which is an intriguing possibility, because the high priest in these temple services would have been actually representing the Lord. So it would have been an identifier of who he represents. He's bearing the name of the Lord, literally. And so that's what he would be wearing. He'd be representing the Savior, going into the temple, making intercession. And as he does this, in Exodus 28:12, we see it says, and thou shalt put the 2 stones upon the shoulders of the ephod for stones of memorial unto the children of Israel. And Aaron shall bear their names before the Lord upon his 2 shoulders for a memorial. So this is interesting because the high priest, he has the name of the Lord. He's representing the Lord as he goes into the temple, but he's also wearing these stones. So he has the breastplate, which has 12 stones, each representing one of the 12 tribes of Israel. And it had the names of each tribe engraven on there.
Cool.
And then he had stones on his shoulders as well, each one with 6 of the names of the tribe of Israel. So not only is this high priest going into the Holy of Holies, which really is that heavenly ascent, it's entering the presence of God. Mm-hmm. He's doing so as the Lord, the intercessor, who is bearing the names of the house of Israel. He's symbolically carrying the house of Israel into the presence of the Lord.
Yeah.
Which is very, very beautiful symbology. And it makes me think of Isaiah 49, where we get a similar picture of the true high priest, the great high priest, and what he does for us in making intercession. 16, he says,
This is one of the servant songs here, right?
Yeah. Behold, I have graven thee upon the palms of my hands. And so you think of, in that ancient temple, the high priest carrying stones with the names engraven on the stones and carrying those into the Holy of Holies. But here we have the actual true high priest with names engraven on the palms of his hands. And of course that has ties to the crucifixion. But to what the atonement actually means for us, what that sacrifice means for us, that's the intercession that allows us to return to the presence of God.
Wow.
And all of that's wrapped up in a name, the name that he bears, and our names. He bears our names, and we should bear his name in a covenantal type relationship. So it can be a little bit, this also plays out in Mosiah 5. This is, again, one of those really lucky guesses that Joseph Smith made when he wrote the Book of Mormon.
I still have Mosiah 5 open.
Oh, look at you. Mosiah 5. We'll go to verse 8. Mosiah 5, I think, is very much a temple text. Mm-hmm. It's very interesting. But when you get to verse 8, actually, let's start back in verse 7, because this is where we get this idea of spiritual rebirth. He says, and now because of the covenant which ye have made, ye shall be called the children of Christ, his sons and his daughters. So we speak of Christ being our brother a lot, but in the Book of Mormon, it always calls him our father, that could be a separate episode, but you become his sons and his daughters. For behold, this day he hath spiritually begotten you. For ye say that your hearts are changed through faith on his name. Therefore ye are born of him and have become his sons and his daughters. So it's his name that's doing it. And, if you are born of someone, you take their name, right? So his name becomes your name. And under this head ye are made free, and there's no other head whereby ye can be made free. There is no other name given whereby salvation cometh. Therefore I would that you should take upon you the name of Christ, all you that have entered into the covenant with God, that you should be obedient unto the end of your lives. So this taking of a name is so much more than just, I'm a representative, kind of like you would be, if you work for a company and you wear the company logo or something. Yeah. This is much more than that. This is not just representing Christ. This is becoming part of his covenantal family, where we are now called sons and daughters, and we've received his name. So then to continue there in Mosiah 5, it says, and it shall come to pass that whosoever doeth this shall be found at the right hand of God, for he shall know the name by which he is called, for he shall be called by the name of Christ. So knowing the name by which we are called is salvific. Mm-hmm. We have to know that name.
There's so much here. Yeah,
there's so much in here.
This is also Day of Atonement imagery, right?
Yeah.
Because at the when the high priest comes out bearing the petal, the seats or the petalon with the name Yahweh in his forehead, which probably means he is Yahweh, he comes out and draws a lot and there are two identical unblemished goats that are presented. And he draws a lot, and this is imagery that's in Matthew. I thought we were going to read it before. Maybe we'll read it now. To sort the goats out into a goat under the right hand and a goat under the left hand. The goat under the left hand is for Azazel, which I think what that means is the goat is appointed to be Azazel, and it's driven out in the wilderness. The goat under the right hand is for Yahweh, which I think means is appointed to be Yahweh. And that is one reason I think that is because that then makes actually great sense of the Gospel of John in the New Testament. That goat is sacrificed; its blood is used to effect atonement. So, so it's interesting to be found at the right hand of God. One sort of echo there is that means to become godlike, to have the lot drawn for you, so that you are the goat of Yahweh, which may mean that you are sacrificed in this life, right?
There's a happy thought.
Yeah, but it also means being Christ, right? He should be called by the name of Christ, right? Which is to say Yahweh. And the alternative is you must be called by some other name. And if this really is Day of Atonement, Benjamin is evoking, he's being discreet because the only other name is Azazel. And this, I think, is Alma 5, right? Either you're the sheep of the Lord or you're the sheep. That's it. You're one or the other. And therefore, you find yourself on the left hand of God. And that doesn't mean that your fate is good, by the way. None of the goats get to, roam free and frolic in the meadow with lots of sweet grass forever. Like, there is the goat that is sacrificed because it is divine. There is the goat that, because it is filthy and bears the sins of Israel, is let out and hurled into a pit to die. Right? I think that's the image that
I think it is, because he
giving us.
He plays on this in verse 9. You'll be, if you know the name, you'll be found at the right hand of God. But verse 10, whosoever shall not take upon him the name of Christ shall be called by some other name. Therefore he findeth himself on the left hand of God. So that certainly evokes that imagery of, in Matthew 25, we might as well go there now, the sheep and the goats. One thing that strikes me about this parable that Christ teaches in Matthew 25, and remember, this is coming right on the heels of the parable of the 10 virgins, the parable of the talents. They're all teaching the same thing, really. And so let's see, in verse 31, when the Son of Man shall come in his glory and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory.
By the way, this is the same scene we saw in Revelation.
Exactly.
19. This is the Day of Atonement. The Son of Man coming in his glory, and the angels coming with him are the host who were in the heaven, who had the linen, who were the angel armies.
Right.
And this is what is enacted every year in the Day of Atonement. I mean, not now. This was what was enacted.
So you mean this didn't happen on the farm with all these sheep and goats? I thought this was a farm story.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm saying, this past October, I don't think anyone was doing this anywhere.
No. Right. So this is actually not a farm story. This is a temple story.
Yeah,
this is taking place in that temple context.
Yeah.
With the sacrificial lambs, the sacrificial goats, the scapegoats. That's where we even get the term scapegoat. So, and yeah, this is the visual here is the Son of Man coming in his glory with all the holy angels with him, to receive his throne of glory.
Yeah.
And so that's the scene here. And he collects all the nations and he separates them one from another, as a shepherd divideth his sheep from the goats.
Yeah. And it's interesting, right? There's an interesting question. I don't know why this is. This seems clearly to be Day of Atonement imagery, but it's not a goat on one hand and a goat on the other. The sheep are all on the right hand, right? And maybe that's an innovation here in Matthew. Maybe that's an old memory. Maybe the book of Leviticus is corrupt, and at some point it was once all sheep or something, right? But the sheep on the right hand are Yahweh, are the flock of the Lord. They are the sacrifice. The goats here on the left hand are the ones that get driven out.
Right. And then going back to Mosiah 5 in verse 12, this is continuing Benjamin's sermon here. He says, I say unto you, I would that you should remember to retain the name written always in your hearts. So that's the sacred name again that we keep in our hearts, that ye are not found on the left hand of God, but that ye hear and know the voice by which ye are called, like the sheep were, and also the name by which he shall call you. And then we get this final phrase, for how knoweth a man the master whom he hath not served, and who is a stranger unto him, and is far from the thoughts and intents of his heart. So really what's happening here in this scene is the sheep on the right hand know the name by which they're called. They know the voice of the master. The goats on the left do not. And so, yeah, they're the ones that are cast out into the wilderness and they get thrown off a cliff. That was the ancient tradition. But then you wonder, like, what separates the sheep from the goats? Like, what's the difference between them? And I haven't spent a lot of time around sheep or goats, I will admit, but they do, to me, sound quite a lot alike, and they look pretty similar. And I could be wrong on this. I'm sure someone out there will correct me, but
Someone has a very strong view on this.
someone has a strong view on sheep and goats.
Correct.
But sheep are more prone to following a master who calls them, and that the shepherd tends to develop a relationship with the sheep. They know each other, they recognize each other, and the sheep want to follow the shepherd. Whereas goats, if you've ever seen goats, they're all over the place, right?
Yeah.
And they eat everything, they get into everything, they're a little bit unruly. So, and I think that becomes the dividing line here between the sheep and the goats, because the Lord explains what made some sheep and what made some goats. And it's this in verse 35, for I was an hungered and ye gave me meat. I was thirsty and ye gave me drink. I was a stranger and ye took me in. Naked and ye clothed me. I was sick and ye visited me. I was in prison and ye came unto me. Then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee an hungered and fed thee, or thirsty and gave thee drink? When saw we thee a stranger and took thee in, or naked and clothed thee? Or when saw we thee sick or in prison and came to thee? And the king shall answer and say unto them, verily I have done it. I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me. Then shall he say also unto them on the left hand, depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels. And he kind of repeats this. I was hungry and naked and all this, and you didn't help me. And they said in verse 45, then shall he answer them saying, in 44, then shall they also answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee an hungered or thirst or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not minister to thee? They don't even know what they did wrong. Yeah. And he said, you didn't do it unto the least of these, so you're going to get thrown off the cliff like the goats. So this dividing line between the sheep and the goats is interesting, because is it just good works?
Yeah. So, okay. So let me point this back at something you said in another session, which might air after this one, depending on how what order Brandon produces them in. Or maybe in a way, this is commentary on the scene in Matthew 7, verses 21 to 23, where some people whom Jesus rejects at the judgment, at the meeting at the gate, and they say, wait a minute, but we did all these great things, right? We cast out devils, we did great works in your name, and it doesn't matter. I knew thee not, right? It's very interesting. There's an inversion here of that scene. 'Cause he says, I was hungry and thirsty and a stranger. And they say, well, what? We didn't do those things, right? This is someone who becomes one of the sheep under the right hand. Presumably that's the same thing as being admitted into the kingdom of God, right? And they didn't do it knowing they were helping the Lord, right?
Right.
It's agapeses, thou shalt love your neighbor, right? And that's accounted to them as helping the Lord in that vulnerable and needy state. So, 2 Nephi 25. There's an interesting reference to the name. So the Book of Mormon is super interesting in what names out of the New Testament that it knows. I think there are only 3. Okay? And they're not necessarily the ones you'd expect. The Book of Mormon does not appear to know Paul, for example. It knows Mary, it knows John, and it knows Jesus. Okay? And the way that the Book of Mormon prophets talk about those names, we get this scene a couple, 3 times. An angel in the night told me the name. Okay? Which might mean that, like, the night before, Benjamin or Nephi or whoever saw a person clothed in flaming white linen, and that person said, "The name of the mother of the Lord shall be Mary." Right? That might mean what it is. I tend to suspect that's not it. I tend to suspect that that the Nephi or Benjamin has had an epiphany, has had a realization, or has decided that they want to share something out of their temple experience, and that those names were embedded in the temple experience, and then Benjamin or Nephi or whoever shares the name, okay? And that an angel told me the name means I learned the name from a temple priest, because an angel is the same thing as a priest, okay? So in 2 Nephi 25, as Nephi's wrapping up, there's this interesting passage where it's one of the 4 mentions of the serpent on a staff in the Book of Mormon. But verse 19, this is Nephi basically speaking to us, right? Like in context, he doesn't seem to be writing to anyone other than his ultimate audience. According to the words of the prophets, the Messiah cometh in 600 years from the time that my father left Jerusalem. And according to the words of the prophets, and also the word of the angel of God, his name shall be Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Now, what he says about, and then he reminds, in the next verse, he reminds us that the serpent that was raised up on a pole is a symbol, and he says in the end of verse 20, there is none other name given under heaven, save it be this Jesus Christ, whereby man can be saved. So the name, right? It is by the name that we are saved.
Right.
There is none other name given. So I was reading a commentary on Mithraism last night.
In your spare time?
Because that's what one does, right? So what is Mithraism? So that's a good question. People who study it debate what it really is.
What it means.
It was a mystery religion. It definitely was going by about 2nd century BC. It was sort of the great rival of Christianity in the late Roman Empire. Like one or the other of those looked like it was going to win out. And Christianity sort of appealed to the masses, including the poor. Mithraism was more of an elite religion, and as we all learned from the 2024 election, you don't want to bet against the working class long term. There's just a lot of those people, right?
Yeah.
So Christianity was the working class religion. Okay, it was 3rd century MAGA. So it won out. But Mithraism. So the author's talking about. So Mithraism is a mystery religion. We don't know anything about its mysteries. We have no texts. What we have is archaeology. We have their temples. They're called Mithraea, and they were decorated with murals. So we have art. We're trying to interpret their religion from art, and a small number of texts that talk about them. One of the things we learn in their texts is that there were strange secret names of Mithras, their god. Like one of them is, I think, Nabarze, and I forget, there are a couple others. And so this writer is saying, hey, these are probably given. These are probably names that maybe not everybody knew, but they were in the nature of passwords. Like when you were going to elevate from the first rank to the second, from Corax to Nymphos to up through the ranks, you had to learn a new secret name of God, because of Mithras, because that was a password you gave in connection with advancing in the mystery. Okay.
Interesting.
I think it's interesting because I think it might tell us what Nephi is actually saying. What Nephi writes on plates are only the more precious things. We should expect that the great sacred secrets are in the plates. Okay? And he gives us lots of really interesting, provocative things about the Son of God and the tree of life and about the prophet Isaiah and stuff. And maybe when he says, hey, the angel of God, query the temple priest, told me that his name shall be Jesus Christ, Son of God. That is the name given under heaven whereby man can be saved. One, I think, tantalizing possibility is that for Nephi in his temple drama, the name Jesus Christ, the Son of God, was something like a temple password. It was the name given under heaven, i.e. given below the veil, by which you could be saved, by which you passed through the veil. Now, I don't know that's true, obviously, but I think it is a very interesting possibility. One thing for sure is that it seems to be, in verse 20, it is the name that saves in this verse.
And I think so Margaret Barker points out that name, and she quotes First Enoch again here, his name was the bond of the great oath which restrained the created order. So there's something about this name that actually holds creation in balance.
By the way, that's super interesting because Helaman 5:12 says that Jesus Christ is the rock. And one of the things that the stone, the foundation stone, the Eben Shetiyah inside the Holy of Holies does, that's the rock that Helaman 5:12 identifies as Jesus, is it plugs up the flood waters so that chaos goes away. Right? So literally the rock is the seal that holds at least forces of chaos manifesting as the waters of the cosmic flood in place.
Right. And that wasn't that believed to be the case in the first temple as well? That it was built on this bedrock with, natural springs underneath. And they believed this was like the waters of chaos that could come up, but that foundation stone kept the waters in place.
In a lot of the poetic accounts, including First Nephi 8, Revelation 22, but lots of others, Othmar Keel, in a book about the imagery of the Psalms, notes there's an interesting contrast. The prose accounts of the temple and the Psalms accounts of the temple are inverse in some ways. In the poetic accounts, there's always water in there. So it exactly what that really looked like in with your physical eyes is debated. But there may have been water pumped in from the Gihon spring, or at least metaphorically, there was a sort of an idea that there was water in there beneath, and it may have had something to do with the cave that's underneath the rock there.
And it's just interesting to note that it's the name, it's the power of the name that does it, that binds creation together, that holds chaos at bay, or that grants access to the Holy of Holies in the temple, and that ultimately provides salvation, that it's only the name.
Yeah, so if Rob K is watching this, he's shouting at the screen. He's like, no, there's so much more. So are you familiar with the 72 names of God?
Yes. Well, I can't list them all, but
we could pull it up and find
quiz
them.
now.
So Exodus 14:19-21 is a passage about crossing the Red Sea. I believe I'm getting the chapter right. Exodus 14:19-21. So, and if you look at those verses, they're all, each of those three verses has 72 letters in it in Hebrew. Okay? And there's an old piece of lore, okay, spiritual knowledge, was that these three verses contain the 72 names of God. And the way you find them is you use a technique, an old reading technique called boustrophodon. Okay? That's a Greek term. It means the turning of the ox. In some very old Greek texts, the way you read is you went left to right on the first line, and then right to left on the second, and then left to right on the third. So it was like an ox pulling a plow across a field. Okay? That's the imagery. So you're supposed to read these verses boustrophodontically. So I'm actually not entirely sure how that is, but I think what it goes is you take the first letter of verse 19, the last letter of verse 20, and then the first letter of verse 21. And then you go back and take the last letter of verse 20, the first letter of 21, the first letter of verse 20, the last letter of verse 19.
Interesting.
Okay, it's some technique like that. And what you get is 72 three-letter names. They're all unique. They are the names of God. And the names were a way to, boy, I'm going to get this totally wrong. There is a spiritual discipline of praying the names of God, which involved reciting all of these names with all of the possible vowel permutations. So this is a way of praying that you might also look like meditation, and it might take, I can't remember the timing, but it's something ridiculous. Like it's many hours to pray your way through all.
Sounds like a future episode.
Yes. We'll sit here. It'll be like the one where Nick Offerman sits there for 8 hours and he takes a sip of whiskey in the middle in front of the fire. Right? We'll recite the 72 names of God as a way to gain spiritual power. So maybe are those used in an esoteric kind of passwordy sort of sense? Maybe. But also I think the idea is that unlock miraculous divine powers in your own life. I know I have not done this, but that is the theory. And so that's a name of God. I don't know if the right word is theology, but there's a strain, there's an idea in Jewish mysticism, or you might call it prophetic science, old Jewish spiritual lore, that the name of God was something that you recited to gain power.
Right. Well, and I think at a minimum for us in our day, in our theology, the name does grant some power, because it is that binding to the one who bears the name.
Yeah.
It is his name. And so going back to where we started with the sacrament every Sunday, when we are covenanting to take his name upon us, that's really what we're doing, right? We are becoming identified with him. And this is another aspect of it as well, as, looking at the Hebrew wedding traditions. I'm sorry to keep riding that horse, but,
Good horse.
But when the bride took the name of the groom, and we don't like this today, we don't like to hear this, but this is how it was. It indicated that she was a possession of the groom, that he owned her. Now that doesn't mean he could just go beat his wife or do whatever he wanted with her, that he controlled her. It meant actually that he had a stewardship over her. But because of that steward, and you think of anything that you own, if you own it, you can name it. Your car probably has a name, right?
It does, actually.
What is
my
it?
car is Joe Duncan.
Joe Duncan.
Yes, this was Joseph Smith's famous horse in Nauvoo. It was named after the governor of Illinois. That is also the name of my 20-year-old Toyota Sienna minivan.
Perfect. I love it. But because it's your minivan, you get to name it.
Correct.
Right? So you name the things you own. You name the things you have stewardship over. So if Christ is allowing us to take his name, it's because he owns us. We are his possession. And because we are his possession, and because he is that great high priest who bears the names and takes them back into the presence of the Father, we are his prized possession. And he talks about coming to make up his jewels. We have his name. He has named us. We can go with him back into the presence of the Father. And so I think when we take that sacrament every Sunday, we need to remember that that's what the name is all about.
Love it. Oh, my mind is blown. What about yours, Dave?
Always.
Andrea, you're awesome. Thank you so much. Remember to emulate the name of Christ and stay curious and hungry. We'll see you next time.